right, I think we should get going. I think Nora will join shortly. She just got slightly delayed. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see folks. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee for March 1st, 2023 meeting. We'll jump right in and get going. So let me start with just reading the agenda and get that approved. Or see if there are any changes, and then we'll get going on stuff. So we'll do the usual, starting with liaison reports, and then we're gonna talk about the main topic is talk about warrant articles for the 2023 annual town meeting. We're gonna do roughly half tonight, half next week. So we are set to do articles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I won't read off the names. I think everybody should have a copy of the warrant and knows what they are. And then we'll approve minutes. Peter.
I have my analog hand up.
Yes, go ahead.
And when I figure out the digital, I'll be all set. Was there assignments to the articles? Because I think I looked,
yes,
maybe not thoroughly.
So I think I sent. So let me come to that in just a second, Peter. Before we get to that, I should ask for a volunteer to take minutes. So we get that set. I'm going to give Natalie a break. She's been doing that quite a number of weeks recently. So looking for somebody else who would take minutes. Wasim, could you do that? Perfect. Thank you. That'd be great. Okay. Peter, let's just get the agenda set, and then let's come to your question. So did anybody have changes to the agenda to propose? Anything that people want to talk about tonight that wasn't already on the agenda? If not, I would happily entertain a motion to approve the agenda as read.
So moved.
Thanks, Natalie. Second. And do a quick roll call. Peter.
Aye.
Steve.
Aye.
Jane.
Aye.
Wasim.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, so that gets us 7-0 approving the agenda. Okay, so Peter, coming to your question. I had meant to, and I sent that set of documents around a couple days ago. I meant to include a Word document that was a list of assignments. Did others get that, or did I mess up and not send it around?
Yeah, it's in there.
Okay.
Okay, my bad.
So
Peter, I can tell you what you're on if you need. Peter, you are on the Article 6 stabilization funds. You have half of the capital, so you have DPW and select board capital.
Okay.
And then you have Article 17 about the speed limits, and that's going to be next week.
Great, thank you. I can't drive 65, so that's a good one for me.
Perfect. The next thing I was going to get to is just to check in and see if anybody had any concerns about those assignments, just to make sure everybody was good with how those got allocated. Okay, so that'll be the plan. Those write-ups are intended to be done after the public hearing as a summary of the discussion at the public hearing and of advisory's recommendation with any dissents that might pop up on those. Okay, so liaison reports. Peter, I know you wanted to say a little bit about the capital budget meeting last night.
Yeah, it was a very productive meeting. We followed up from our initial meeting with Sean about capital requests for town buildings, roadways, and stormwater. And based upon our initial guiding principles of accountability, unexpected building events, and possible use of free cash, it was well adhered to the presentation last night, which we did vote on. And there were 4 projects worth $350,000. So we honed in on the projects. And there's an effort underway to track those projects to completion, which after we got through the turbulence of COVID, acute COVID, post-COVID, is that's an effort underway now for everyone involved. And it was town roofs, HVAC for town hall, transfer station, dry hydrants, and then a general building capital fund for contingencies if you want to consider that. And also a request, which I saw within the free cash, to utilize 150,000. So all of our guiding principles that we had hoped to achieve were achieved in terms of specific projects, what the overage with the general capital fund, and use of free cash. So in my mind, it was a very productive meeting. And Don was coming off of plowing all the streets and keeping us safe, and still attended that meeting and was able to assist us in these decisions. So
Thanks, Peter. On that, the general capital contingency fund, was the intention to fund that via free cash?
nope, that was to be bonded.
Got
So
it. Okay.
the free cash is for other projects identified.
Okay.
And
Yep.
to use.
Peter, we just lost you.
Dan, Heidi has her hand up.
Yeah, Heidi, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I can't bond a general capital amount like that. So one of the reasons we're taking the overall ask at 350 and we're asking for free cash for 150, and we'll bond 200,000 of the projects. So the projects I'll be picking to put through to bond council are 2 of the concrete projects that would meet capital. So that we didn't have a vote of anything of saying what's going to be free cash. That's really not what capital budget does. But
Right.
the overall ask is 350. There will be a portion bonded, a portion for free cash.
Perfect. Thanks for the clarification, Heidi.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Heidi. Yes, now that I look at the book, the capital budget book, those projects amounted to 350, and then the free cash was applied to that to bring it down to 200,000,
Okay.
which would fall into specific projects.
Sounds like capital budget did very good work in getting that to that point. And as you said, getting things set up with focusing on specific projects and getting system in place to track those projects over time. That sounds, as you said, kind of in the post-pandemic world, that seems like a really good place to have gotten to. Anything else, Peter, that you wanted to mention, or is that?
Nora's not here, but she was the one taking minutes, and I would have deferred to my junior colleague, but that's all I have.
Perfect.
Reading
Okay.
from the book that.
Perfect. Good, thanks. Anybody else with any liaison reports to bring to advisory?
This is Natalie. I went to the water on Monday, and they're all very worried about the Water Commission about PFAS in our water. So that's a big deal. If anyone cares about it or wants, it's nothing budget related. There's some well testing that went on, and we know red flags unless the state lowers their amount, but they made some points. I don't know if everybody knows that if you get your well, this is the way I understand it, if you get your well tested and you fail PSA, PFAS, you're responsible for cleaning it up. You can't sell, you have to disclose it to a potential seller. You become like a toxic waste site, not really those words, but like it's a thing, it's a big deal. So I just found that interesting as a homeowner, and that's all to do with the private wells.
Yeah,
And then I went to the Energy and Sustainability Committee meeting yesterday, and they talked a lot about what you're gonna talk, I guess, whatever they talked to us about their warrant, about the solar energy overlay.
Okay.
And so they'll explain that all to us. I can't explain it to you.
okay.
But
What- Natalie, what was the meeting? What was the meeting that you went to where, what was the committee or the group where PFAS was discussed?
Water Commission,
Got it. Okay, good, thanks.
and the possibility they're wanting to test. If you've ever read about the water plant in town, the public well would be on Morse Road, and that has never been tested.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they were thinking maybe just test that water too, to see if someday if it still is safe, if they want to use it.
Okay, thanks. So the one other one I have just to mention, advisory members will remember that at our meeting with the school committees and school finance folks that Dover Warrant wasn't able to join that meeting because of a schedule mess up with meeting getting posted and so on. So they are having that meeting. Dover Warrant is having their meeting with school committee and Dawn Fator and so on tomorrow morning at 7:30 on Zoom. I'm gonna listen in just at least for the first hour or so, just to kind of see if they're going down the same sort of tracks that we did and have the same concerns or have different concerns. As long as we don't have a quorum, anyone else who wants to go is welcome to. I'm guessing at 7:30 in the morning there won't be a quorum problem, but just wanted to pass that along. Okay, so if there aren't any other liaison reports, I think we should just get going on talking about warrant articles. And I think a good number of these discussions, I think, will be pretty brief. For those who are here presenting, just as kind of a heads up, at the public hearing, warrant article proponents, right, will have 5 minutes to speak. So if you want to think of tonight as a dress rehearsal for that, I think would make sense to try to limit any comments that you have to 5 minutes or less, which I think for most of these should be plenty of time to kind of lay out what the issues are and what the intent of the article is. And Nora, welcome, good to see you. So that being said, we're going to start with Article 2 on supplementals. And Deb, I think that's going to be you, and I'd be happy to, Heidi as well, I'd be happy to share a screen if useful. Just tell me what would be most helpful.
I think that maybe talking about free cash to begin might be helpful, going down all the articles so everybody can understand why we're using free cash for some things and not other things, and what the supplemental is about and everything else like that. Would you mind sharing that screen?
I'll do that in just a second. Okay, hopefully is now visible.
Yes, it is.
And hopefully big enough to be readable.
So we use this spreadsheet to try to help us determine what we're going to use the free cash for. If you remember, we voted on fiscal policy last year, and our fiscal policy was to remain 5% of the budget in free cash. So based on our certified free cash from last year, which was 2.7 million, after we go through this budget process, we would like to keep at least 1.648 million in free cash. So what we did was kind of backed into things and everything else like that. And the first article is supplementals, and you'll see this all comes out of free cash. So in the middle of the page where we say recommended uses, the first supplemental is snow and ice. Historically, that has been high. Last year it was 121,000. This year I'm just putting in a plug of 21,000 at this point in time. Year to date, we're still in the positive from the operating fund, but that was before the snowstorm yesterday and this upcoming snowstorm. So I'm just putting a plug in there of $21,000. On the other supplemental, which will be ambulance, Jeremy, Zach, and I sat down, and the ambulance revolving fund is going to be about $60,000 short. So we're going to have to supplement them for about $60,000. And then the school is also short this year, in large part due to out of district cost. The number I got from Dawn was $358,000 that they're going to be over budget at the end of the school year. So we are suggesting to use $258,000 out of free cash. And then the other $100,000 will be a combination of the stabilization fund, the SPED stabilization fund, and also the reserve fund. So the total amount of supplemental money coming out of free cash will be $339,000. The other things that we use free cash for are the stabilization accounts. And Heidi will get into this a little bit more as we move along. But, you know, it's $50,000 for general stabilization, which is what we've been trying to do historically. And the OPEB liability trust fund, again, another $100,000, which is a historical number. And the capital stabilization, if you remember, that was a new account last year. We initially had hoped to put in $200,000, but based on, you know, the use of free cash for different things, right now that plug is in at 150, but that can change as we move along. What we've discussed is to make the total of the capital stabilization of 150 and the snow and ice supplemental, between the two of them, the total will be 171. But if snow and ice goes higher, then the capital stabilization amount will be lower. But if snow and ice is lower, then the capital stabilization will be higher. Those are going to fluctuate after we know how much we need for snow and ice. And then, you know, again, as we move along, we're going to talk about the capital items that we're proposing to pay out of free cash and some money that we want to set aside for the 350th anniversary. So that's just kind of an overview, so that when you go back to Article 2 and you see the supplements, that is the $339,000 that I was talking about. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I have one quick one right off the top, and then we'll get others in. What's the proposed split, Deb, between on the school overage? What's the proposed split for the SPED fund and reserve fund?
At this point in time, we're looking to take about $60,000 out of the SPED stabilization account, which will leave us a balance of about $50,000.
Yeah.
Which, you know, and Heidi probably can speak to this better than I can, but you know, when we go through the S&P ratings and things like that, they like to see that we have something going on in there. And so we didn't want to completely clear that out. And the 358 number that Dawn gave us is, you know, an estimate. It's not concrete. So we thought we would probably take $40,000 out of the reserve fund or thereabouts, depending on how things come in at the end of the year.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Deb. Okay. So I'm going to take people in order. Hands went up. So Peter, let's start with you.
Yeah, this is a great presentation of how to use free cash. It's new, and for 5 years, it was always in the realm of advisory at town meeting, how to use free cash. And so I think the approach is better than the way we used to do it, because we didn't have free cash certified until later in the year. What prompted this innovation?
A large part of it started with the fiscal policy from last year. I didn't know if you remember, Heidi did a great job last year of getting us to the fiscal policy and trying to maintain a balance of 5% of free cash. So
is that the one I wrote?
I probably, yeah. And
Yes,
so,
you and Mark Albers.
Yes, good.
Yes.
No, great. And
yeah,
that's
so,
the downstream impact of that, and it's paying dividends. So thank
yes.
you.
And obviously, if people have concerns about any of the particular allocations, that's the idea, is to talk about that tonight. Jeff, I think you are on next. If you want to go ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess the mantra, as everyone knows, of advisory though, is free cash isn't free and it isn't cash. So my concern is, I understand the percentages that are the target for free cash, but you're saying that you are using roughly $1 million of free cash. Is that money that we have? In other words, you need to have the available funds to fund each one of these accounts from whatever we have available in our banking balance, which is not free cash. Free cash is really like retained earnings.
Right, yes, we do have a plenty cash balance to pay for that.
Okay, thanks.
And that's quarterly billing, right?
A large part is due to the quarterly billing, yes.
Another improvement.
Steve, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have two questions. One, I guess you already sort of answered, because initially when I saw the school supplemental at 258, I was like, well, that has taken 100,000 out of the sped stabilization, and I wondered if it would be wise to essentially just replenish the sped stabilization. But I guess you sort of answered that. I guess the question becomes, are we all comfortable with the balance being about 50,000 in the sped stabilization, or is that a number that's lower than we would like to have?
Steve, I could answer that one, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So that is lower. My plan is, so on the bottom of this sheet that Deb has on the free cash, we talk about how the goal of how we were replenishing the general stabilization fund. You know, when we took the 150 out, we were doing this over subsequent years to get back to a certain amount. The same thing I would be recommending for the sped stabilization, and we'd have a plan with going next year. We would start putting in 50 to 75,000 into the sped stabilization, because what we did was, this made us ask Dawn, what amount should we have in the sped stabilization? Clearly, there wasn't enough for this year. There was an extreme amount used, and we haven't been putting money in the sped stabilization for the last couple of years. So the amount that Dawn was recommending was 300,000 to 400,000 should sit in sped stabilization. That's not something we can fund now. We don't have a formal policy on it or anything, but I think we should have a plan that going forward, we will be putting 50 to 75 in each year to reach that amount. So that was going to be, when I discussed stabilization fund, I was going to go into that explanation.
Okay, great. Yeah, I realize that I'm now taking our articles out of order, but because we have this nice spreadsheet up, I'm like, let's just talk about what's on the sheet right now. My other question is, Deb, you had mentioned that we wanted to have 200,000 in capital stabilization as the sort of initial thing, but we are reducing it to 150. But then I noticed that after all of our uses of free cash, the balance is at 5.14%, which is a little bit over the target of 5%. And it looks like it's about 48,000 above the target. So I guess the question is, why couldn't we just put 200,000 in capital stabilization and have our balance of free cash come in just a hair below our target?
Yeah, you obviously could. This is, you know, when we started, that was, to be quite honest, we started with the snow and ice supplemental being 121 because that's what it was last year, and the capital stabilization being at $200,000. And then we had our capital, articles up until today, when we found that, talked about the EMS equipment for the school. Initially, we thought it was going to be $75,000, which we would bond, but they lowered it to 40,000. So we added that to capital items, and then we were just readjusting numbers. So, you're right. We do have a little bit of room if you choose to do that, but this was our initial recommendation.
Okay, those are my only questions. I think maybe when we get to the actual stabilization fund article, then advisory can discuss
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Jane, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I thought that at one point I remembered hearing that the state was now recommending a higher percentage of free cash be retained. Is that true, or am I just misremembering that?
No, I think that it keeps changing. We were basing our our uses on our fiscal policy. But I do think that you're right. It is a recommendation, but it's, again, we were following our policy.
Do you recall what the state recommendation is?
I want to say maybe 7%, but Heidi, do you remember?
Yeah, it's about 7%. They'd say it's 7 to 8%, but this is recommendations. It's something that was a newer version they just put out. So our goal is to kind of inch up there, which is one of the reasons why we kind of left it at 5.14%, keeping a little more money in. And especially as Jeff pointed out, it's not always cash sitting in the bank. So even though it says 48,000 made a play, I'm more comfortable leaving it 150 in the capital stabilization fund this year for that. And it's more that they want to see a plan of what you have. If, we have not traditionally used more than the 3 to 5%. We used to go for 3 to 5% for keeping in free cash. So for us to go to 5 was actually a little higher amount than we've had in the past, rolling over. And I think it's something we, again, can be working towards the 7%, but I don't think we have to have it right away.
So again, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but as you were saying about other stabilization funds, focus being on having a plan for where we want to get, but not thinking this is the year we have to fund it all to get there now.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Jeremy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and generally the recommendations from DOR, the Division of Department of Revenue, DLS, Division of Local Services, that percentage that you keep on hand also includes like general stabilization and other stabilization accounts, not just free cash. So they really like to consider those as well as free cash, which Sherborn does have stabilization accounts to put in the mix as well. It's
okay.
Not just free cash when you consider that.
It's more the broad concept of this isn't the right technical term, but the broad concept of reserves and reserve capacity for funding in the event of unanticipated. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. Anybody else on this? Okay, great. Heidi, do you want to go on to OPEB? And if there's anything you want me to share, please let me know.
Sure. Actually, no, this was going to be very quick. This is usually a routine amount since I've been here of 100,000 from free cash. I was recommending the same. I don't think we need to increase it. It is an unfunded mandate. So there is nothing that is driving us to increase the amount right now. And most towns have moved to, they are trying to fund some things and saying when they have finished funding their pension and retirement fund, then they will switch funds over to OPEB, which for us would be in about 2037, 2040 in that range. And this seems to be an acceptable practice right now.
Thanks. Peter, go ahead.
This is just a general question. Deb, do you have a sense of what our average daily balance in liquid accounts are, not the checking accounts, but the
Peter, I think you're gonna have to repeat that. I think Deb dropped off for just a minute. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was over, Peter.
It was pretty bad timing. My computer just died, so sorry about that.
No,
ahead,
I have
Peter.
that effect. I have that effect on people. They drop off the Zoom when I start to speak. Do you have a sense of what the average daily balance in our checking accounts or liquid accounts are? Just out of curiosity. And if not, that's fine, because it's
Heidi would probably have a better balance because she does all the cash. But I was going to say, like, when I do the cash reconciliation, we normally have about 15,000, but that includes the stabilization accounts. So I don't know, maybe 10,000 or 10 million.
Yeah, I was gonna say between 9 and 15 million, depending on where we are in the tax cycle. You know, every 3 months we bump up and it kind of goes back down. So, but that
so
includes all
in-
trust funds too.
okay, all trust funds, but in highly liquid components, we have at least $1 million.
At least 1 million, yes,
Oh, yes.
yes. And
Gosh,
currently, right after
that's-
taxes, I got about 5 million in a liquid account.
That's impressive. So to put this into context, as we deal with these reserve accounts, free cash, the real cash, the cash you can take to the bank or is already in the bank, is at least $1 million on any daily balance perspective. So that's very strong.
Yes, we are in a much better position. And that's why when you talk about funding and taking these monies out, I won't transfer money from the OPEB trust fund, the 100,000 until a certain point in the year. I don't need to transfer all this amount of money out on July 1. And then it will be kind of spread out throughout the year. Supplementals will be transferred out right away. And a couple other free cash items, but other items, especially for the trust funds, I don't have to transfer them on July 1. I can transfer them in December. I can transfer them in March, as long as it's done by the fiscal year.
So with a high level of confidence, all of these recommendations know that there's cash in the bank when these are executed.
Yes.
Thank you
Okay. Thanks,
for
Peter.
your answer and for monitoring the liquid assets.
Heidi, anything else on that you wanted to say on OPEB?
No, it should be short and sweet.
Okay. All right. Anybody else on advisory with any questions, comments on that one? Okay. So going on to cemeteries, Chucky, if there's something you'd like me to share, let me know. So this will be Article 4 as it's currently set up.
Chucky, you're muted right now.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, just a quick comment on your procedure too. I went through all 3 emails that I was sent and not one of them told you what time this meeting started. Something you might consider letting us know?
Sorry about that. It's
It had the
on
Zoom
the
number, it had how
That's
long
my
it took
bad. I'm the
off.
one that sent out those emails.
it's on the posted agenda on the
How long?
town's
I
website.
don't get the posted agenda because
but
I'm not
not-
on your
yeah.
posted
Yeah,
agenda
okay.
committee.
So a helpful reminder for next year. Thanks.
Yeah, just it would be helpful to those of us that have about a 2-minute thing to do, that it would be nice to have this general sense of when it is. Okay, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to speak at the March 18th thing because you know it all, and I'm not going to speak at town meeting because everybody knows it all. This is the same thing every single year. This article releases the money that has been collected through the year from the sale of lots. The town holds it until annual meeting and then it's released so we can do projects with it. It doesn't cost the town anything because it was collected by us, turned over to whoever holds the money in the town, and then they give it back to us to spend. And actually Deb actually has it. And so when we have a bill, we send it to the town and they pay it.
Okay.
Any questions? I'll answer them.
That seemed pretty clear.
It is, and we do this every single year. And we've talked over the years about whether it could be a revolving fund or something. According to state law, it can't be, but it
Okay.
basically is the same as we collect it, we spend it, we collect it, we spend it. Most of what we spend it on is trees.
Yeah.
So do we have an amount that that we'll be transferring this year?
Deb comes up with that. Deb has that.
Yeah.
amount.
Yeah, Chucky and I did talk to the other day, and she said that she really only needs to keep about $1,000 in the account just to keep the account going. And at this time, we have about $44,050 in there. So I would suggest $43,000 could be transferred over to the care of the cemeteries.
And it really sits there with Deb until we ask for it. It's
Yeah.
not like not like you hand it to us and we put it somewhere else.
No, yeah, we actually kind of handle it as like a capital article. It rolls over into the capital articles, and then we just, process all the invoices against it.
All right, seems very straightforward.
It is. And
Anybody?
if anybody's curious, it's 90% of the sale of lots. The other 20%, or the other 10% we put in perpetual care. We used to put a different percentage, but when earnings went down to basically zero, it didn't seem to make a lot of sense to have it all invested in perpetual care. And so we use it to do projects, so we don't have to come to the town for you to pay for individual projects that we do up there. And we also, for those of you that aren't familiar, we have 8 cemeteries in town. Probably
Very
each one of you lives near one of them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And Chucky and her team do a great job.
very good, thanks. I haven't been doing this as long as many other people have, but I am sure this will be very straightforward at the public hearing and at town meeting.
It is, and I don't even come to the March thing because you guys
Okay.
have the answers if somebody asks.
Yeah, okay,
Unless I get a call that somebody says you need to be there, and we definitely don't speak at town meeting.
all sounds good. All sounds very good. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. And
No.
apologies again for not getting the timing out. Hope that
Well,
didn't mess
that's
up your
okay.
evening
I
too much.
finally figured out how to get on the town website and look it up, but I'm not good at the computer stuff.
Okay, well, good warning for us. Good
I
warning for us.
started this job long before they had computers.
Mhm.
Fair enough. Okay, thanks, Chucky. So let's go on to Article 5, which would be revolving funds. Deb, if you want to take that, and I am happy to share the town warrant or whatever would be most helpful.
Do you want to share that other spreadsheet that I sent you today that kind of list out the articles that we're going to go through, and
Sure.
it will list all the revolving funds?
Yep. Give me just 1 second to get that set up. Okay, should be there.
Yeah, so if you go down to where it says Article 5, these are all the revolving funds that we currently have, and basically they're all staying the same except the 2 that are noted. The one for the ambulance, in the past, in the past couple of years, we've actually been putting the total amount of money that we've been spending. But we did have new auditors this year, and they did tell us that we are handling that incorrectly. So if you remember when we talked about the operating budget, there's always a line item in there for ambulance. And, for fiscal year 23, it was $205,000. And then we put everything in the revolving fund. And at the end of the years past, we've been moving the money out of the operating fund over to the ambulance. Well, they told me that that was the incorrect way to do that we actually should be taking expenses out of the revolving fund and moving them to the operating budget, because that's where we budget it for. So the amount of money that is the limit in the revolving fund is really the amount of money that is the revenue. And according to Zach, the amount of revenue for next year will be $205,000. So that's why that limit changed. And the other limit that changed was the surplus equipment. And that's following a conversation that was had with the chiefs and Sean. So those are the 2 changes from last year. Oh, the third change is that we did eliminate the recycling revolving fund that no longer exists.
Very good, thanks. Questions, comments for Deb? Okay. Oh.
Actually, Deb, may I just ask again? With the ambulance, what is the new procedure now?
That we will be charging expenses to the operating budget until we hit the limits that's in the operating budget. And then the rest of the expenses will go into the revolving fund, which is offset by the revenue that we receive in the ambulance account. So like when Sean does his budget, he really has, or not Sean, Zach does his budget, he has 2 different pieces. Basically, he puts together the revolving fund based on what his revenues are going to be and his expenses. And then whatever the shortfall is the amount that we put into the operating budget. So so going forward, we'll be putting expenses against the operating budget until we get to that limit. And then the revolving fund will be just the net of the revenue and the additional expenses.
Thank you. So then when, I think when the budget was presented to us, it was still kind of the old approach, correct?
Well, it really doesn't have any impact because the way the budget has always been presented is there's just one line item that says ambulance, and the ambulance number varies from year to year, but I think for FY24 the number is $235,000 is what is in the operating budget for ambulance. And then this number that you see here, this 205, is what Zach thinks is going to be the revenue that's going to come in.
And so Deb, the practical sequence is expenses get covered from the operating budget. When the amount in the operating budget is exhausted, then turn to the balance in this ambulance revolving fund to cover the remaining expenses for the year.
That's correct. So that in the revolving fund, the expenses aren't going to be nearly as high as they have been in the past.
Yeah, right.
If you look at like the previous year's revolving fund limit, it was like $425,000, which was the sum, which was all the expenses.
Yeah, yeah.
I see.
Wasim, good?
Yeah, I think so. So
Perfect.
really the only change here is now we're going to see revolving fund that is really the revolving fund plus the line item in the operating budget is going to equal the expected total revenues, right?
Yeah.
Total expenses, Wasim, is going to equal the total expected total expenses. The 205.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, the 205
Sorry.
is the expected revenue. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining. Thank you.
Yeah, Zach is not really real happy with how this revolving fund is being used. And, you know, now Jeremy is on board to give us some direction. We're, thinking about possibly changing the way we handle the ambulance for fiscal year 25. So something to look forward to.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for the accounting lesson. Always very helpful. Appreciate it. Any other issues on revolving funds, concerns about limits or anything anyone on advisory wanted to check in on? Okay, very good. Thank you, Deb. So let's go on to Article 6, stabilization funds. Heidi, tell me what you'd like me to share.
Sure.
If you'd like to share, or if you'd like to share, that's good too, whatever.
No, I mean, we could put back what Deb had up, the first one, which we already talked actually about most of them.
Yep. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll get that up. Okay. There we go.
Yep. So and the stabilization ones, we have our general stabilization fund, and that one I'm recommending $50,000 kind of to do our catch up to reach the goals that we've decided we wanted to be at 3%, and we're about 2.55% right now. And the plan is that in 3 years, we will be at the 3% range. So way down the bottom of that page, it shows each 50,000 increment, roughly where it's going. We have about 843,000 right in it today. We're trying to reach 989,000. And over the next 3 years, we should be reaching that goal. So this is just part of the plan on this range. 50,000 for that. Then we have our SPED stabilization fund, which sits at 108,000 today, and we're have to utilize some money. I don't want to take the full 100,000 out of it because I don't want to leave 8,000 sitting in it, almost depleting the account, which when we go to do a bond and we're talking to Standard & Poor, I don't think will look as good. I think utilizing part of it, but then showing again, we have a plan next year to fund it and continue forward, just like we do with our general stabilization fund. That target amount now seems to be identified as we should maintain a 300,000 towards 400,000 amount in that account. And we're gonna have to do that again over a period of years. Because we don't just have enough cash sitting around to fund it one time to reach those numbers. But again, having a plan seems to have been okay with us, with Standard & Poor and the rating agencies. The other stabilization funds we have are the Elder Housing Stabilization Fund, and there is no recommendation to do anything with that account this year. There's been no need, so that's not on this list. And then the last one is the Capital Stabilization Fund, which, for the reasons mentioned earlier, I'm recommending asking for 150,000 to go into this. The goal is that in 3 to 5 years, we will be having this built up to an amount where we use this as a source of funds for some of the smaller projects, or if we decide we're going to save up for a bigger, like an ambulance or something, we'll have this as another source of funds in the future. Any questions?
Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple questions, Heidi. The 3% target, is that our policy or is that a state guideline, or where does that come from?
That has been our policy on that. And again, the state sometimes seems to want some higher numbers if possible. But when I looked at other towns, a lot of them were just choosing target numbers that were based on historical use of what they expected to use. And we have not used our general stabilization fund much. We tapped into it for the trees, but that's really the only time that since I've been here so far in the 5 years that we've used it. So we haven't really determined another need to put more than 3% based on our history of uses, especially where we have some other capital stabilization funds and the elder housing ones and the SPED as other sources. Some towns only have one general stabilization fund. But the state is also moving to recommend that you do have different types of stabilization funds, which is what we're doing. So I haven't seen a demonstrated need to go more than the 3%, which is what our policy states.
I don't necessarily have any problem with what's suggested here, but I did notice that if you look at last year's figures, our projection for where we would be after FY23 and FY24, we're actually going lower. You know, we thought we were going to be at 2.73 after FY23 and 2.89 after FY24. And I think just because, you know, the overall budget is going up, the percentage.
It's not, it's that, but our earnings went down.
Okay.
We were also counting on the earnings, and the stock market was not good last year.
Okay, so, you know, do we still feel confident, I guess I would ask, that we're going to be able to bring that number up? And if we can't bring that number up, does it really matter? You know, are you at all concerned?
No, I think if we have to go out another year due to the economic impact of the environment, I think that's a fair argument to create. I mean, we haven't shown a real need to use it. I think that the only reason we want to strive to the 3% is to have the story to talk to S&P about where we are doing with our financial management. And until we hear otherwise, and we haven't heard otherwise, this seems to be okay.
And then with respect to capital stabilization, you mentioned, you know, that we'll have this money to spend at some future date, but I don't recall, do we have a policy as to when we would spend the money and for what? Not yet.
We just did the first financial policy one that Mark and Peter had put together last year. I've talked with Jeremy about it. There's things we'd already want to fine tune because DLS did come out with some new guidelines since, saying that they would like to see free cash sitting at the 7 to 8% range. That wasn't in our initial draft that we put together on that policy. So I think we have a great start on a financial policy, but I think they need to be looked at every year. And Capital Stabilization Fund was new last year. That was not initially included in that policy. That would be added. So usually we have, I found the best time seems to be working at over the summer after we get through all the budget process. And that seems when we can finally get some more work done on policies. So hopefully this fall we'll be coming back to you with some more guidelines, and that would be one of the ones we'd look to create some guidelines on.
Okay, and then you tell me if I should ask this question later when we're talking about the capital items, but I'm just curious as to what the thinking was in, I know you said ideally we would have put another 50,000 in the capital stabilization fund, and we are, below the 3% target for general stabilization. And yet we're using free cash, a fair amount of free cash for capital items. So again, I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm just interested in the theory behind why we decided to put more into capital items and less into the stabilization fund.
I was trying to cut down some of the debt costs, and our debt has gone up significantly. So I was hoping to put items such as the police cars and some of the equipments that had a shorter lifespan, that by the time we go to bond them, the interest you're paying on 5 years and the cost of issuance adds more money to them proportionally than if we did some longer term, bigger items. So I was trying to get the smaller items to be some free cash items and concentrate on bonding larger ticket items that have a longer term, much more than 5 years life expectancy. So it was more just kind of trying to balance those factors. I mean, there's different ways to do it, and people can choose to say, I want to do something else. And I thought it was important to try and lower the debt ratio if we could, which is why I was willing to say, put a little less on the capital stabilization fund, which we don't have a formal plan yet on that, and try to take off some of the debt burden.
Okay, and then was any thought given to, since we don't really have a formal policy on use of the capital stabilization fund at this point, was any thought given to taking some of the 100,000 that's currently in it and using some of that for some of this year's capital? So it would be, kind of an in and out thing as opposed to build up, build up, build up?
No, I was trying to get that to a point where it would have some earnings and become a little more useful of an account if we didn't have to. And if we were really short on money or funds and we didn't have cash available, free cash, then yes, I'd say use that account if we had to. I don't really feel we're in that point. So I was kind of trying to let that build up, get some earnings, and then be a resource in about 3 to 5 years.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Peter, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Heidi, thank you very much for that. And Jane, your questions led into my next question. In the policy, the best practice was contemplated that utilizing departments of capital would be assessed. I think that was left on the cutting floor, and that didn't make it into the policy. But the idea that police, fire, and DPW would have a line item that would fund a stabilization fund that they could reinvest into the next piece of capital that they needed. I don't think that made it into the policy, but it's something worth considering going forward, as opposed to relying on free cash, which could ebb and flow throughout the years based on many, many factors. But if we know every 10 years we need $1 million fire truck, that each year you want to put a certain amount into that fund from the fire department and then maybe from other departments to fund replenishment of that capital. And so that's another means of financing versus just relying on what's available in free cash year after year. And so I guess the question, Heidi, is, was it contemplated to assess a department, or I know there is the used equipment funds that they have at their disposal, but to make it more systemic, that we know police cars needed to be bought, fire engines needed to be purchased, and DPW equipment needed to be used, and to take from their operating budget a portion to fund a stabilization fund so that it's perpetually replenishing the capital stock.
Well, the only way they're going to have something in their operating budget is if we raise it through taxes. So what they don't have a source of revenue to fund capital other than what the taxpayers have voted to put in the operating budget. So we'd essentially
Correct.
be
No, that's absolutely correct. So
okay.
it's kind of a assessment for what the department needs in capital each year versus just going in the stabilization fund is to try to avoid quoting a bond, I believe.
Right. It just, the one we could, I mean, you're essentially going to be taxing an amount every year for equipment. The problem is if it's in the operating budget, if they haven't used it during that year, it'll fall back out to free cash the next year. Because of the way the cycle is when they're buying.
Yeah, Peter.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, Peter, it's an interesting point that you raise. And I guess in my mind, the capital stabilization fund is not precisely what you suggested because it isn't assessed to specific departments, but it has the virtue of setting aside funds each year in anticipation of future capital needs, just as you said, because we know that those capital needs are going to be coming. And so the capital stabilization fund to me seems like a kind of broad town-wide way of thinking about that, then of course requiring judgment and a decision about, well, to which department's needs will it be allocated. But in my mind, the capital stabilization fund is doing part of the work that you're pointing to here.
Right. I just think in order to keep it towards capital, it might be a one-time raise funds a certain amount to fund a capital stabilization fund that's taxed a one-time tax for everything versus taking the chance that it wasn't spent that year and falling back out. I think they're all good points, and I don't think it's something that we're going to be able to come up with a solution tonight, but it's, we've talked with Jeremy already about this. These are some of the areas that we've identified we want to look into more and come up with some better plans in the future and some more policies.
Yes, I plant the seeds. So in 50 years, when I retire and still living in Sherborn, that there'll be a fund available for that new fire truck.
And we
Right.
hope when that day comes, Peter, you'll invite all of us to your party.
Well, I'll be riding the fire truck.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Okay, thanks. Anything else on stabilization funds? Heidi, Deb, anything more you want to say about free cash, or did we for Article 10, or did we really already cover that earlier?
Unless you have questions, this is kind of our recommendation.
Anybody with any other questions on that bit?
Just please forgive me if you already mentioned this. Is the capital stabilization right now, there's 100,000 in it?
Yes, 102,000 now.
102. Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned SPED, and it's not listed here. I know this is, we're not recommending putting anything into it this year apparently, but what's in there? How much is in there?
There is 108,000.
Okay, thank you. So 102 and
Approximately.
108. Okay.
Right. And those are earnings that go in on interest. So some months it's a little higher, some months it's a little lower right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else on that? Everybody's good? Okay, so we'll go on to Article 11, funding for town's 350th anniversary. I'm going to pass the baton over to Steve, since my husband's on the committee working on this. So I'll duck out for a minute and come back when this conversation wraps up. Steve, take it away.
Great, thanks. So Frank, I believe you are the one who is in charge of this. Is that right?
Actually, it's Mary
Oh,
Moore
sorry.
and that's
Sorry.
okay. Mary and George Fisk.
Oh,
I
right.
think
Sorry, Frank. You're on a totally different thing. Sorry.
Thank you.
I'll let-
I was worried there, Steve.
well, let's see what Frank has to say about it.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry, Mary. Go ahead, please.
That's okay. I think George had a conflict, so he's not going to be joining us. But I have just a few slides I was going to present, if that's okay. I'll
Yep,
be
you
less
should be
than
able to share
5
screen.
minutes. Yep. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm here to talk about the 350th celebration and the warrant ask for $10,000 that we've come to you for. We have our incorporation celebration going all the way back to 1674. We celebrated our 300th in 1974, the 325th in 1999, and next year will be our 350th. You know, in anticipation of this, we're organizing a steering committee that will develop a project plan and a calendar of events. We're going to enlist subcommittees and volunteers, identify budget, funds, grants to support events. This is one of those budget identifiers. We want to be able to report on the progress to the select board and then really provide regular updates and encourage community engagement, you know, throughout the year in anticipation, you know, between now and January of next year. This is the current makeup of the celebration steering committee. We've got a great cross section, and George Fisk has agreed that he will be the honorary chair, and we've got Betsy Johnson as an honorary historian. You know, feeling very fortunate that Heidi has agreed to help out as well, not as a town treasurer, but as a treasurer of the steering committee. And then in terms of the objectives and next steps, you know, as I said, we want this to be a memorable celebration for everybody. It's an opportunity to share Sherborn's rich history. We think it's going to encourage community engagement and pride. And I think, you know, after coming off of a couple tough years with the, you know, COVID and a lot of, you know, some challenging situations around town, including the project at the library, I think this is going to be a really nice community-wide celebration. And I won't go through the detail, but we've got, you know, a month-by-month flow of the things that we're doing to try to get organized around this. So here's the ask. We're looking for sort of $10,000 to help support sort of the startup funding. We expect that the invoices would be submitted through the town, sort of through a standard warrant process. And the initial costs would support specific expenses that I'll go through in just a minute. And as I mentioned, Heidi has agreed to be on the steering committee, which we're very fortunate about. And she would be helping us with that, you know, in her role on the steering committee. But it would be completely independent of all town funds, obviously. I just want to make sure that's clear. So the startup funding that we're anticipating needing is sort of the first category is PR and community outreach. We think that'll be about $4,000. We have a current proposal in hand to do some website development. That's going to be really crucial to not only sharing information about the events and the celebration, but also recruiting volunteers. And then we have some costs that we expect will be associated with what we're considering kind of anchor events throughout the year. And, you know, some examples of that would be, you know, a parade, a barbecue, house and garden chores, and some other town-wide events. And I think on some of this, it's not entirely clear, but we think maybe some of this could be potentially recouped as in-kind services or sales of merchandise that we might, you know, get after, you know, like hats or, you know, any sort of swag that we create, we could recoup that. So that's the ask. I'm excited about the opportunity to work on this. And I don't know, Heidi, if you want to add anything else.
No, I think this is, you summed it up very nicely.
Okay, so that is our summary.
Great.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I think this is interesting because George Fisk was instrumental in the 300th townwide celebration.
Mm-hmm.
He was instrumental in the 325th celebration.
Mm-hmm.
He's very much involved with the 350th celebration. I'm going to challenge George to take on the 375th celebration also. Okay,
I think that's
and
a
he'll
good.
be about 102 years old then, but we want him around here because we need to save him for that celebration.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, Provincetown just celebrated their 400th anniversary, and like at the 300th, they built a monument for Provincetown. Is there any state funding? Is there any grants? Is there any recognition from the Commonwealth of our achievement? Not that we need, you know, a Provincetown monument, but
That's a
would be
good,
nice.
that's a great question, Peter. And I want to thank Jeremy Marcet. He actually has spoken with Rebecca Rausch, our state senator, about requesting some funds from the state for that. And we are planning on reaching out to our new representative, James Arena de Rosa, requesting some funding on that front as well. I think that the helpful part of this 10K ask is that it really allows us to get started with some of the communication outreach, immediately, as opposed to waiting for next year's budget to be released. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. We could do a monument somewhere in town.
There you go. The smaller one.
Yeah, just a little one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got one quick question, because this obviously is an initial ask. Do you have even a ballpark concept of overall, what do you think the total amount will be, presuming that you'll ask for more next year as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's going to necessarily be a huge additional amount. There is the Sherborn Fund that will be looking to sort of, help us with some additional funding. And I think we want to create events that are self-sustaining. So if we had a barbecue, we would sell tickets to it. It wouldn't be something where we would just, fund events for the sake of funding events. But once we have our final calendar put together, I think we'll have a better sense of the actual specific, costs associated with the calendar events. So probably my guess is by, July, August, we'll have a better sense of it. But if the 35,000 from the state comes in, which is what we've asked, I don't think we would necessarily need to come back for anything here.
Great. And I plan on buying lots of swag. So
Good. Yeah. We'll make sure it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. My wife is asking if we can get shirts with George on them.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
All right. Any other questions from advisory or anybody else? All right. I think that covers it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I think next up will be Article 12. Jeremy is presenting the combined treasurer collector. And Dan, I'm going to let you take back over again.
All right, thanks, Steve. Jeremy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll do my best to give a summary here. I think many of you probably know the history far better than I do. But I'll just point to some resources that have been made available through the years, and some of the history and what's currently being proposed. A number of years ago, the UMass Collins Center for Public Management did a report relative to the organization and operations of the town of Sherborn. In that sort of set in motion a Sherborn government task force to look at the operations and organization of the community, laying some of the seeds for thinking about what positions should be elected or appointed, and what current practice in local governments in Massachusetts are. Shortly after that, the Mass Department of Revenue Division of Local Services did a study of the financial management of the community. And actually, I'll read a paragraph from that, which really summarizes the current request or proposal. And the Sherborn Government Task Force, actually, there was two different phases of it. Actually had a report to the community in 2019. That summarized a lot of these recommendations, and a lot of that information is still up on the town's website. The Government Task Force 2 has all these documents I just referenced up on the town's website if you're curious to read them in more detail. But I think just this summary here in the recommendations from the Division of Local Services really describes the advantage of merging and making them appointed the treasurer and collector positions. So I'm just going to read from page 12. It says, due to the parallel requisite job responsibilities and professional skill sets, we routinely encourage communities to combine the offices of treasurer and tax collector into a single appointed position as a way to streamline operations. Having all receipts collected, counted, posted, deposited, and managed in the same office by one individual selected for his or her credentials and experience makes organizational sense. So that's really sort of a quick summary of it. Let's see. I also wanted to point out that there was an initial at the 2012 annual town meeting. There were two articles that were proposing to make those two positions appointed and to further merge them. At that time, the town decided to take no action. But then more recently, at the 2019 annual town meeting, Article 21 made the treasurer's position an appointed position. That position is currently appointed by the select board for a 3-year term. And I found some interesting information in my office that must have been prepared, along the way. There was a summary. There was a survey of 21 communities that all have the same total assessed value. That was kind of the comparison metric there that was being utilized. So there's 21 communities that were very similar to Sherborn in their total assessed value. At that time, I think this was from about 2012. At that time, of those 21 communities, 15 had combined treasurer collector positions at that time. I went through and looked at the 6 that still had separate positions. I just looked up if that was still the case in these communities. So as of actually this afternoon, when I looked these up, now 20 of the 21 towns that were surveyed have combined treasurer collector positions. The one community that does not have the position combined is the town of Sherborn. So I thought that was just an interesting note. So since 2012 to current, 5 of the communities in the survey have moved towards having a combined position. There was also a little summary of more of a location by surrounding communities to Sherborn, Natick, Holliston, Norfolk, Medfield, Millis, Hopkinton, Medway, Dover. All those communities have a combined treasurer collector position. The only nearby community that still has a separate is Westwood. Westwood, similar to Sherborn. So I thought that was interesting. So more recently, the select board did vote 4-1 to include a warrant article at this town meeting coming up to combine, to make the collector position appointed and to combine the positions of treasurer and collector. Town council has drafted the language that's currently in the warrant. The warrant article would authorize the select board to file special legislation to the Massachusetts General Court. That's the House and Senate of Massachusetts. That special legislation would create an appointed collector position and combine the positions of treasurer and collector. That position would be appointed by the select board for a 3-year term. And I think sort of one of the questions that comes up is when this would be effective, and that is actually in the draft language put together by town council. This would take effect provided that any other incumbents holding the offices of treasurer and collector on the effective date of such special legislation shall continue to serve out the remainder of their respective terms. So I just did a review this afternoon of the current folks that are in the incumbents in the treasurer and collectors. Our current treasurer was appointed in 2022 for a 3-year term. So she has 3 years remaining in her term through 2025. And your collector was last elected in 2022 as well for a 3-year term. So should the town choose to move forward with this special legislation, it would not go into effect until those 2 incumbents have finished out their terms in 2025, which is somewhat consistent with what the government task force in their latest recommendations in 2019 basically had assumed that the town would be moving towards this combined position and that the town should be planning its implementation. So that's my summary for you folks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Anyone on advisory with comments? Peter, I see your hand up if you want to start.
Yeah, Jeremy, there was no mention within any of those reports of a system of controls and checks and balances, those that collect the money and then those that account and deposit it. In the for-profit sector, not-for-profit, non-municipal sector, there's a benefit to having two separate people doing those positions from a system of control and auditing. Municipal's different, I understand that. And the recommendations and arguments that I recall hearing from the past, there was that benefit to Sherborn to have these separate and distinct. How have we, and you may not know, so I'm going to open this to other proponents, and Jeff, if you're on, how have we moved beyond those articles that were voted down previously for the benefits that apply to the non-municipal sectors?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I really can't speak to some of the specifics of the conversations in the past, but it is quite common. I mean, just from the stats that I mentioned earlier, that this position is combined into one treasurer collector position, and for what it's worth, it's worked in other communities, and they've found some efficiencies in their operations and sort of synergies in their tasks to do that. And it is something that's commonly recommended by the Division of Local Services as a best practice.
Thanks, Jeremy. Jeff, do you want to?
Well, I come from the same world Peter does. So the vote on the select board was 4-1, and I'm opposed to this. And the reason why is they're not remotely similar in my view. I hear what Jeremy said, and I know that a lot of towns do this. I would combine or not the positions, but the offices of a finance director and collector, because they're really more sort of accounting and operational finance groups, much like a controller is, whereas the treasurer is really doing financial strategy and investing for the town, overnight investing and funding. So if you think of a corporate world, the treasurer would be the treasurer in a private company, and the controller, office of controller, would do the what the finance director and the collectors do. Collectors basically accounts receivable. So I don't think this makes sense to me. I hear what Jeremy says. I know a lot of towns have done it. I know the Collins report recommended it, but I'm not in favor.
Thanks, Jeff. Jeremy, do you know, are there towns that have combined the finance director and collector positions?
Many communities don't have a position of finance director, so that's not an easy one to do apples to apples comparison on.
Okay.
Most towns are obligated to have a town accountant, but the position of finance director is a choice.
Okay. Anybody else on advisory with comments, reactions? I have one kind of deep in the weeds, just language question. So I'm going to just share the draft warrant that has the language. And I'm looking at the essentially the last sentence that says Office of Treasurer Collector, incumbents holding the Office of Treasurer Collector on the date of the legislation shall continue to serve out remainder of the respective terms until a treasurer collector is appointed. Jane, maybe this is a question for you or Mike, for the lawyers here. Do those words mean that the current incumbents stay in those positions until 2025? I was just reacting to the until a treasurer or collector is appointed. So wondering if this passed, and then if, the next year select board, or shortly after this passed, select board appointed somebody, would the until a treasurer collector is appointed take precedence over the incumbents serving out their terms, or what's the way to? I may be way off base here. I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding the language that's written in here.
It might make more sense if it said something like they shall serve out the remainder of their respective terms, at which time the treasurer collector would be appointed. Is that the point you were, I mean?
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point. So,
Yeah.
so to me, I'm sure town council has been through this, and maybe town council is confident that this language means what we all think it means. But to me, the language Jane proposed would be more direct, clearer, less chance of ambiguity and some misunderstanding later. So maybe there can be a conversation about whether a small tweak in the language would be helpful. Okay, thanks, Jane. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but just trying to make sure that the words say what we all want them to say. Anybody else with any comments or?
Yes, I have a question on this one.
Go ahead.
Jeremy, the question that was raised earlier was the accountability of checks and balances. If both these positions were combined, would we lose that checks and balances, which we like to have in our financial system? Or since you're probably going to be the person or to which responsible for all of this occurring, do you see a problem with ensuring the town has proper checks and balances in terms of collections and investments and so forth?
I personally don't see a conflict there, in that the treasurer and the collector, they're both sourcing funds. A separate position of town accountant is helping sort of identify the use of funds. So I think with proper oversight, which I believe that our organizational structure would have, and I would note that through the regular town audit process, each year the town we hire an audit firm to do a fiscal audit of the community, and those are some of the things that they look at when they do those audits. And actually, at the select board at their upcoming meeting our auditor is going to be presenting their findings from last year, and it's good. Our management letter is pretty thin compared to some of our peers, which is a good thing. So I personally don't have any concern over that.
So there'd be nothing lost by combining these two in terms of checks and balances?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I guess along those same lines, I accept the fact that this is the state's recommendation. It's the recommended best practice that the vast majority of municipalities, especially ones similar to Sherborn, have already done it. I guess for anybody who is against this because of the checks and balances issue, are there any known cases in the state or elsewhere where, as a result of the combining of the treasurer collector positions, there has been a case of malfeasance or embezzlement or something of that sort that arose out of it that would have been prevented had these two positions been separate?
Nancy Hess could answer that. I think she's smiling right now.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Before you were all born, Sherborn we had the same person in the two offices. And unfortunately, we did have an issue with embezzlement, which resulted in the gentleman committing suicide. So that sort of has stuck in our head. But I do agree with what Jeff said. They are very different functions. And I have always appreciated the fact that there is the checks and balance, not just for somebody who might be trying to embezzle, but we're human and we make mistakes, and it's nice to have the follow-up with when money is transferred and so forth, to see that that you're doing it right. I always appreciated that. Also, the independence of each of the officers to deal with their responsibilities in the manner that they wanted to. So I like I say, I agree with Jeff. I think it's, for one thing, I think some of these towns were unable to fill some of the positions and were sort of forced to put their people together. But yes, it was a recommendation, but I'm a firm believer that one size doesn't fit all. And I think Sherborn's done very well in maintaining a strong financial team. And we know that we have some people in place now that are doing a very decent job. So, and they're young enough, I think we'll have them for a while. So I don't see this as a pressing issue, but I'm not in the office anymore.
Yeah,
So
Nancy, on Steve's point, do you know of other episodes? Corey, I'll get to you in just a second. Do you know of any other episodes other than the some years ago
ancient history
Sherborn episode?
I am aware of things happening in other towns and other offices, but I don't know whether it can be attributed to the fact that
Okay.
that that they were combined or not combined. But certainly I am aware it has happened in other towns.
Okay, thanks. Corey, let's go to you. Actually, Corey, Marion's had her hand up. So let me jump to Marion, then Corey will come to you. Marion, go ahead, please.
Yeah, right. I think it's important to understand when you're hearing about this possible combination of roles, to know that these two people are not working in a vacuum in town hall. They have assistants, there are others that are working closely with them. And I think for the purposes of explaining this to the town at town meeting, it would be nice to sort of give as an introduction, perhaps, a sort of overview of how finances are handled in town hall, including the assistants, the accounting assistants, or whatever that's available to these positions. It's just a bit of recommendation that I would find very helpful as a citizen.
Okay, thanks, Marion. Corey, to you.
Sure. Jeremy, I'm not sure that you know this, but I was chairperson of the last structured town government committee that had several warrant articles that were adopted that you cited, at least one of them. And we did not look at combining the office of collector and treasurer. So I don't really have any position to take on that. But one thing I would like to point out is that the way this is crafted, not only does it combine the two offices, but it also changes the collector from elected to appointed. And since we did sponsor the idea of appointing the treasurer, I would raise the issue that if you are an elected officer, you serve for the 3 years of your term. And Nancy Hess actually sponsored it. We did adopt a bylaw several years ago that in the case of malfeasance, financial malfeasance, that you can remove a financial office holder, an elected office holder. But the point was that it does not speak to people who are simply not performing well, that could be stronger performers. And one of the arguments for going to appointed is that if you were supervised and had substandard performance reviews, that you could be either coached into performing better, or you could be removed from your job and a new candidate appointed.
Thanks, Corey. Helpful background. Anybody else on advisory or others with comments? Nancy, one more quick comment. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to correct Corey that bylaw that went into effect was for anyone who became incapable or incompetent, as well as dishonest, was included in that article. So someone not doing their job would have been subject to that as well.
Anybody else? Corey, if you had another thought on that, go ahead, or anybody else with any other thoughts on this warrant article?
So just a quick question to you, Dan. The point that you raised about the wording of the article, is that article going to change? The wording is going to change by town meeting?
Somebody who knows this process better than I do should help.
That would probably be up to Jeremy and then mostly the select board, because you guys haven't signed the warrant yet, right? So you can still open it and amend it and then close it again. Is that right, Jeff?
Go ahead, Jeff.
We would have to open it. See, we haven't signed it, but we've closed the warrant. So
Okay.
you would have to do what Stephen just said. We would have to open the warrant, but I don't
Because
know.
otherwise we would have to amend it at town meeting.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is never a
That
good.
seems like not a good idea.
We want to clean
Never-
the
No.
warrants. So you would have to, you'd have to do it before the public hearing.
Yeah, I don't know of any plans to do that, but I completely agree that the language is not helpful. It's vague. You know?
I mean, again, there may not be any misunderstanding, but it just seemed like an opportunity for a year from now for there to be a disagreement about what those words meant. And if everyone wants it, well, so as Steve said, sounds like it really lands in the select board's court as to whether it's consequential enough to be worth making an adjustment.
But
The other
it's-
option,
a
which
year
we-
from now, it could be a town meeting. It could cause a lot of confusion at town meeting.
The other thing
Somebody
that we
else might
often
raise the
do
same
as well.
point.
No,
Go ahead, Steve.
sorry, but a lot of times what we'll also do, if advisory is all in agreement that something needs to change slightly in the wording, is that we can amend it in our motion. You know, so our motion could be, we recommend favorable action, with the following amendment, and then, change this word to this phrase. And that way it doesn't have to be an official amendment on the town floor, where somebody has to write 2 copies and give one to the clerk and one to the moderator, and you have to do all this business. It's essentially our motion in and of itself can change the language. And as long as the town accepts that, all they have to do is vote aye. So that's another option.
Steve, the process being that if advisory makes that recommendation, that's what goes to town meeting, and then
It has to be in our motion. So when we do our motions meeting, we have to make sure that it is written into the motion. But as long as our motion makes the amendment, then all the town meeting has to do is vote yes.
Well, that seems like it would probably be the most straightforward, provided that advisory agrees that a modest word tweak would be helpful. What you just suggested, Steve, seems like it would be the most straightforward way to just adjust the words.
Yeah, and it might typically, Jeff, town council is usually present at the public hearing, right? So we can usually
You're always on stage.
Yeah, so we can ask Heather, right? Heather.
I think it'll be Heather, yes.
Yeah, so we can probably ask her at the public hearing, is this cool for us to just make this change,
Yes.
Okay, that's very helpful. Not quite history from before I was born, but history I didn't know. So appreciate getting a sense of how we can do that. Jane, go ahead, please.
Well, not to overcomplicate things, but if one of the incumbents were to leave their job before their current term has ended, I don't know how that would affect this. And I don't know whether there's another bylaw that provides that, whoever comes into the job maybe finishes out the term. I just don't know, but I think this is actually potentially a little bit more complicated than we're even discussing tonight.
Yeah, okay. So wondering if this would be, Jeremy, maybe this is a question for you or Jeff, if this would be worth a brief conversation with town council just to kind of check in, see what thinking was on the language and see if there might be a way to, a simple set of word changes that might be something that could go into an advisory motion that might just take care of some of these small things.
Dan, I'm sorry, I got dropped from the Zoom for a second there, so I missed some of that conversation. Apologize. But what was the language discussion regarding? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So for the combined treasurer collector, there was the language point that I raised a bit ago about whether there was clarity about exactly how long incumbents would continue in office. And then Jane just raised the point about what if one of the incumbents left before the end of their term, and what would the arrangement be for filling in the balance of the term and how that would work. Steve Tsai had mentioned that one possible way of adjusting the language rather than the select board reopening the warrant and going through that process would be for advisory in the motion that it makes in advisory's recommendation to have the motion made that goes to town meeting include a suggested amendment to language. So there are a couple possible places where some amendment to language might be helpful. I was raising the possibility of whether it'd be helpful to have a conversation with town council, see what their thinking was on getting the language as it is, and thinking about whether there's some small word adjustments that might just eliminate the potential ambiguities that people have raised tonight.
Yeah, there's actually an opportunity. The select board have yet to vote the actual wording of the warrant. The warrant is closed for new items, but the actual warrant article language is still open. The select board haven't voted the actual warrant language. So there's an opportunity to change language without having to do that at town meeting floor via a motion. So with that summary, Dan, I could certainly circle back with town council who drafted this wording and relay those questions to see if they had any suggestion. And then I could circulate a draft to those interested.
Okay, that would be great. Just seems like it might be a way to just avoid potential ambiguities at a future date. And if I can be helpful with that, Jeremy, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Anything else on this one? Okay, so let's go on to Article 13, the one on amending the appointment process for Board of Assessors. And Nancy, I think that's you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, well, this resulted from a promise that we made at town meeting last year. We adopted the state statute to change the assessors from elected to appointed, and adopting a state statute, you can't have any amendments. So a lot of concern was expressed that there could be eventually no resident or taxpayer representation on this board, unlike any other town board that we have. So after discussion, it was pointed out that we just had an election, so we should be covered for at least 3 years while we address the concern. But shortly after, the Board of Assessors announced their intention to resign. So when approached, Drew agreed to stay on to give us an opportunity to put something before the voters this year. And we learned through town council that in order to make residency a factor, there must be a bylaw. Originally, this proposal was put in the form of a citizen's petition with over 50 signatures collected. When it was brought before the select board, they requested some language changes. Since any changes to the petition would require collecting signatures again, it was agreed that they would put it on the warrant if Eric and I would work on massaging the language. We have done that, and it has been vetted through town council. It has not yet come back before the select board, but we believe that we have addressed the major concerns. As you well know, the Board of Assessors is involved in the very base financial process in figuring what each of us pays through the evaluation of property and rate setting processes, determining overlay, new growth, classifications, exemptions, abatements, etc. And yes, there are state laws that govern each of these areas, but there are policy decisions that are also made. The state used to review every 3 years to determine if towns were on track. Now it's every 5 years, and they allow for a margin of error, which doesn't mean much on a $5,000 tax bill, but is real money on a $15,000 tax bill. Sherborn taxpayers should have a voice at this table. The state used to require assessors to complete the certification class by the end of the second year. Now it is online, more accessible, and the requirement is the first year. This should make a new person on the board more valuable sooner. And since we will have 2 professionals in the other seats, as well as a director of assessing, there should be plenty of resources to help bring a new resident member up to speed. And this way, Sherborn taxpayers would have a voice at the table. You were sent a copy of the latest language. And
would you like me to share that, Nancy?
Yes, but I would like to tell you there is one little error.
Okay, let me share it. Let me share it, and when everybody can see it, I think it'll be easier for people to understand.
Okay.
Understand.
And I'd like Eric to chime in anytime that he wants to, because he is a very significant worker on this. In the transcribing back and forth between us and town council, inadvertently, the word law was left out of the backgrounds that we were looking for. Background in finance, law, real estate, appraisal, and or municipal government. So if you would just pencil that in, because that will be in the language. I don't know whether you just want people to read it yourself or you want it read out loud, but this is what, as of this morning, this is our language that will be in the, with the addition of the word law.
Okay. I think everybody can just, I sent it around earlier and
oh, good.
I think people can read it on the screen. Eric, go ahead, please.
No, just simple. Just real quick, there's 3 of us on the select board on this meeting. I'm very limited what I can say until one of the members steps off. That's all. Open meeting law issues, obviously.
Yes, of course.
Right.
I had done the same count.
Okay, it looks, I think we're actually good now. Okay. Yeah, so I've been working with Nancy on this. I'm working with a town council.
No, wait, Eric, Marion and Jeff are both still on.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw him step off. I thought I saw Marianne step off. Oh, no, she's still on.
She's
Sorry.
still on my screen at least.
No,
So she just
somehow my Zoom went unalphabetical. It was alphabetical and then it's
Eric, Marion just stepped off. I can see everybody, so I think you are good now.
Okay. Okay, very good. So per the direction of the select board, I've been working with Nancy on this, also working with our select board staff and town council, and actually our existing director of assessing. And I think what we have here is some pretty good language. I think it covers the concerns that were spoken before. It allows for of the 3 member of the board of assessor, 1 member to be a Sherborn resident. It allows for also requires certain qualifications in there and mechanisms where if we cannot find a qualified person who is a resident to actually go for a non-resident as well. I'm optimistic with this. I think it covers what we're talking about. As Nancy had just mentioned, after item number 4, there was basically a typo during the back and forth of all the edits. It lists a certain like criteria of finance, real estate, appraisal, and municipal government. I agree with Nancy. I recommend the insertion of the word law between finance and real estate, or anywhere within that list, but finance and real estate, I believe, is where it was before, and that's it. So, any questions on this? I'll be happy to answer as well.
What kind of law?
It's just actually municipal law. That'd be it. But it could actually be real estate law. It is subjective. So what it is basically it allows it puts certain criteria. So the select board who appoints the Board of Assessors, it gives some kind of criteria that they actually have to have some kind of specialty. And there is some subjective nature to it. We just put the word law, we willingly put municipal or real estate law, but it basically adds some kind of professional nature to it, that it can't just be completely anyone, but it has to have some kind of professional skill set to be appointed to it.
All right. Anybody on advisory with comments, questions for Eric or Nancy?
Yeah, I guess I have some questions.
Go ahead, Steve.
I mean, I guess I remember Drew's presentation last year when, changing the assessors from elected to appointed, and he had a whole very nice presentation and all the reasoning behind why essentially this is a fairly technical job. There is not a lot of sort of discretionary decisions being made by assessors. They're pretty well bounded by law. So I guess my question then is like, what is actually gained by restricting one of these positions to a resident? I know, Nancy, that you've said that taxpayers have a voice. I guess what is the nature of that voice? What's an example of a decision that could be made by an assessor where they have an amount of leeway where a resident would make a decision in a particular manner that a non-resident would not? What would be an example of that?
Am I to answer?
Go ahead.
You or anybody who has the answer to that question. Essentially, what's a scenario where something is to be gained by having a resident as an assessor as opposed to a non-resident?
A resident would know the town. They would know more about what you're looking for, actually, as an advisory committee, as far as money that is put aside. They would have an oversight on the laws that are followed and the procedures, the timing, dealing with the residents' concerns and so forth. They would be able to bring things to the table that someone who doesn't have any connection to the town other than coming to the meeting and listening to the business that has to be done. So I think that they would be a valuable asset because they would be bringing what the three members have been bringing to the table for as long as we've known about the various. They know the people and they know the circumstances here as far as budgeting and priorities and all of that kind of thing. I think that's important.
I mean, I guess my question is, I don't know, it seems to me it's not a policy making position. It is not a political position. It essentially, my understanding is that the assessors are not, generally speaking, responding to the public and the public's requests and making decisions for the benefit of the public. They're just doing a technical job. So I guess I don't see the advantage of requiring one of them to be a resident. I mean, obviously, if you happen to have a resident who is accredited assessor, great. But I don't know. I guess I fail to see the scenario where we would say, darn it, we had 3 non-resident assessors. Now look at what happened. If only we had a resident in one of the positions, this wouldn't have happened. I guess I need some enlightenment as to what that hypothetical is.
Eric, it looks like you wanted to get on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's basically some level of accountability. So if you have a board of assessors that actually maybe doesn't set policy, but sets the guidelines on how assessing is done, and you have a director of assessing, if all 4 of them are essentially not residents, are essentially, you know, out of town per se, you're going to have less accountability. Having 1 out of 4 being someone who is a resident and has that accountability, I do think there's something to be said about that, especially when we went from extreme, where we went from 3 elected, and elected has like no kind of skill set or has no criteria on onto how one is actually chosen or again background or anything else, and then we're going to all of them going the opposite direction. I felt this seemed like a good balance. I really did, because then you have the skill set, you have the criteria where they're selected based on their background and their education and their skill set, and then you also have at least one person who is in there who is a resident and has that accountability. It seemed to be a good balance to me. So that's, I guess, was my rationale for endorsing this.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Jane, you had your hand up for a while. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I share really the same views that Steve expressed. I do recall, I mean, I would have no problem with this if number 4 were eliminated, but I think there were good reasons why last year we moved from elected to appointed, because we thought it was important that the assessors have, you know, the technical qualifications. And I don't know why we would want to, you know, undercut that by potentially having someone on there who doesn't specifically have the qualifications for being an assessor. I agree with Steve. This is not a policy making job. This is a very technical job. And frankly, I could see as having someone on there who doesn't have the technical, potentially does not have the technical expertise, I think could be as much a recipe for trouble as it could be, you know, or more recipes for trouble than necessarily would be helpful.
Thanks, Jane. Peter, go ahead.
By elevating the requirements for the position, I think town residency is obsolete, because we want someone who has that wide breadth of you know, experience with the criteria, and you know, being in town, yes, they're embedded in the community, but from a technical perspective, I think it doesn't matter.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Anybody else from advisory or other who's want to offer a view or questions, comments? Eric, go ahead.
Just to address those previous concerns, as a reminder, we spent generations and decades, if not, you know, what I guess it's 350 years, isn't it? As all members being town residents, and it hasn't blown up yet. You know, maybe it wasn't ideal, maybe there was some hiccups here and there, but to kind of balance that to now go 2 to 1, I don't see how that would be as detrimental as people are indicating at this point. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Anybody else?
I mean, I guess I don't think that it would necessarily be detrimental. I mean, I think just kind of like what Jane and Peter said. I still fail to see the advantage. You know, Eric, you had mentioned accountability, and it's kind of like, well, accountability to whom, you know? And if anything, I almost feel like there is a certain disadvantage to having a resident who has, I don't know, maybe even a conflict of interest being a resident in town and having some measure of control over assessments or abatements. You know, like if a friend or a neighbor, you know, wants to apply for an abatement and is now going to appeal to the one resident assessor for a more, you know, positive decision on that abatement. I would prefer to know that all of the assessors are actually independent and have no connection and are just making a purely technical decision. So I guess Jan had mentioned, oh, if you were to eliminate number 4, I guess one question currently, in order for a non-resident to be appointed, do they have to basically have the qualification listed here as, 1, 2, or 3? Or can the non-resident also not be accredited and have simply one of these kind of background what do you call qualifications?
Somebody else will probably know this. I'm guessing that that what was adopted when we adopted the shifting to elected assessors would have specified the qualifications, though I don't know that for sure. Eric, do you want to speak to that point, and then we'll come to Nancy?
Yeah, just real. So actually, it's training. So if you don't have 1, 2, or 3, every assessor, no matter who you are, and this goes across the state, that actually has to acquire certain training from DLS. And there's actually a 6-month window. You have to take these certain courses and so on and so forth. We talked about it. We didn't put it in here since it's required by state law anyway. So therefore, you have the subjective nature of number 4. But then no matter what, you have the certain training by DLS that's required as well, no matter what.
Okay, thanks. Nancy, go ahead, please.
Well, that's basically what I was going to say, and to address Steve's concern about someone bringing pressure. There are 2 other people there and the director of assessing. I think that is far less likely to happen with the makeup of the board. I still feel that having someone who's in the town, knows the town, and can bring some concern. Yes, the law does control the process, but there are policies that are in place that control timing and how some of these things are dealt with, that I think a resident can add value at the table. So that's, Eric pretty well covered, I think, my thoughts.
Thanks, Nancy. Anybody else on this?
Let me just add, Stephen, I think, your point is right on. However, I agree that should any situation come up where an individual is being, the assessment is being considered by a neighbor, they would have to recuse themselves. I think that's the professional approach to take, that there would be no conflict of interest or undue influence. But I think it would also be helpful here to review the last 5-10 years of the assessors' activities and look at issues that have come up that perhaps could be avoided if we had someone in town on the assessors board. I know timing of assessment has been a major concern, where properties that have been built haven't been reassessed for a couple of years. Now, there may be an oversight, but I think someone in town might see that and raise the point that, look, the assessment has to be done immediately after the work is done. So, Steve, I would look back at the history of the Board of Assessors for the last 5 to 8 years or so, and then satisfy yourself that perhaps maybe a member of the town on the assessing board might be beneficial.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Okay, so for advisory members and others, some things to think about there as we move towards the public hearing. Okay, so let's keep moving on. Let's go on to Article 14, which is Land Acquisition Committee membership. And Frank, I think it's back to you.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Many of you may not know about us, about the Land Acquisition Committee, but let me just give you a little background. we were created by annual town meeting in the mid-90s. The purpose of the Land Acquisition Committee is to advise the select board and annual town meeting on purchases of any parcels of land that may be of interest to the town. Now, this interest is quite broad. It could be used for land, might be used for school site, might be used for recreation, might be used for trail access. It might be advising the select board on an option that they may have on any action on the chapter 61 land, like we have had, and like we have pending there on Hunting Lane. So those are the areas of concern that the Land Acquisition Committee is brought into, and we provide advice to the select board as to what considerations they might take into on the option period that they have. We have several opportunities currently that we've addressed. The first one that was creating the committee was in the mid-90s was the Price property on Lake Street, wherein the town did take the steps to acquire 20 acres of land to put into conservation and to preserve actually the site where the well for downtown water was considered maybe 10 years ago. The Hunting Lane parcel that is currently being considered and pending the Labarsky project is an area that we are also able to provide some guidance to the select board in their deliberations. We're currently working on the trail system that we have in western part of Sherborn and the Upper Charles Rail Committee to try to get access to the CSX rail line from Whitney Street north to Framingham to complete that trail into the Framingham and Natick communities, as well as tying it into the Holliston trail system that comes into Whitney Street. So those are the kinds of activities that we get involved in. The committee, as it's structured right now, consists of members from open space, planning board, the select board, the moderator appoints 2 members of our committee, a capital budget appoints a member, and conservation commission appoints a member. These members are appointed by those committees so that we're not our terms of office and so forth are 3 years, and they turn over either in time or as new appointees are made to our committee from those sponsoring organizations. So this particular article is recommending that we add to our committee, Groundwater Protection Committee, a member, and then Groundwater Protection Commission as a member of our committee, and drop capital budget. And the reason for that is that groundwater protection seems to have a charter and interests that are similar to ours. And the capital budget will eventually get involved in any recommendations that we would be making to town meeting that would have an impact on their responsibility. So this is just to update our membership and to try to get those parts of the town involved with us as we deliberate various issues.
All right, thank you. Let's see, Peter, you have your hand up. You want to start? Go ahead.
Yes, I support this because being on Capital Budget Committee and being appointed by the moderator to be on advisory, to be on capital budget, there's overlapping coverage there, and to diversify to another section of the town, it makes sense.
Anybody else?
I might also add, although not a member of our committee, George Fisk, who is president of the Sherborn Rural Land Foundation, and who has interests very similar to ours, but perhaps taking a different approach. He attends all our meetings and provides input to us, and he also brings a lot of knowledge about the town and the history and so forth, which we found to be quite valuable.
And I understand the logic of wanting to add groundwater protection, and I take it partly just seems like, as you said, capital budget will come to these issues if that's appropriate later. And presumably, rather than just adding people to the committee at a certain point, committees start to get a little unwieldy. So just thinking about what size committee is going to work well, and not just adding. I presume that's part of the thinking as well.
Yeah, we're dropping one and adding one. We'll still have 7 members. We wanted to make sure we had an odd number, so if anything came up for vote, we have an odd number. Yeah.
Sounds sensible. Jane, go ahead, please.
I apologize, Frank, I may have missed this, but what is the total scope of the Land Acquisition Committee? Is it just to make to review land, to make a recommendation to the town about whether or not the land might be acquired? You know, where does its functions stop, and then an actual discussion about how you would fund the purchase if you were going to make it start?
Well, let me give you an example. Land that is categorized as Chapter 61 land, as you may know, if the owner of that land wishes to change the use of that land, the Board of Selectmen has an option to acquire that land at the professionally appraised value. There was a parcel of land on Maple Street that came before town, that came up to come to discussion, where a proposal to change the zoning on that was put before the residents at town meeting. And had that passed, the select board then would have had 120 days to opt to acquire that land at the appraised value from the owner. Our committee was involved all the way along. As it turned out, the land was not rezoned, so we never really had to act. But had the rezoning occurred, passed by town meeting, we would have given the selectmen our best assessment of whether or not they should move forward with acquiring that and exercising their option. We would have done the research, what the appraised value was, what the alternatives were, and so forth to the town. So the select board would be able to act within that 120-day period with full knowledge of what their actions would result. So we're sort of supportive to this Board of Selectmen. However, there may be other parcels that we're aware of that might be of better use for municipal purposes than for development.
But fundamentally, you're an advisory committee, right? Are
Yes.
there any circumstances under which you would, the committee would make a definitive decision?
No, I can't think of any. Although, there was one parcel of land that was going up at auction. It was Chapter 61 land, and we attended the auction. The auction never was carried out, but we attended the auction to be able to protect our options. So we would have taken action then if it came to that.
Frank, to ask Jane's question in another way, there isn't any independent funding source. It's
No.
just making recommendations to the select board, and then
Yes.
normal sort of funding procedures for what would happen if any of those
Yeah.
recommendations were pursued.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, I see your hand up. Is that from before or another comment?
No, I'm challenged. I want to pull my hand. So I'm all set.
Anybody, any other comments, questions for Frank? All right, that was very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to Article 15, still talking capital budget related things. So amending the capital budget bylaw. And Corey, the floor is yours. And I hope Corey's still here. Corey, are you there?
Yes,
Floor is yours.
I'm still here.
Excellent.
I'm electronically challenged. The Capital Budget Committee is governed by Chapter 6 in the town bylaws. And as they currently stand, the date by which any budget maker in town who has a capital request has to file their report is February the 1st. And the problem with February the 1st is it means that the Capital Budget Committee and the Advisory Committee are then doing their work simultaneously because the hearing is in mid-March and they're doing duplicative work. And really it makes sense that capital budget should be investigating the capital requests first and then passing their recommendations on to advisory for advisory to consider. So this year we tried asking for the budget makers to, of their own volition, to cooperate with us and make their applications by January the 1st. And actually we got some pushback about that because the deadline for operating budget submission is also January the 1st. So although we persisted with the January 1st for this year, it was suggested to us by one of the budget makers who objected to the January 1st deadline that actually December 1st would be a better deadline and that it wouldn't crowd out their preparation that they were doing for their operating budgets. So that's why we were suggesting moving February 1st back to December 1st. It will mean that we'll have our work done before advisory and it will not crowd the budget makers who are trying to prepare their operating and their capital budget documents at the same time. The second part is changing the definition of what constitutes a capital item. Right now it's $10,000 and the $10,000 was actually established in 1987. And one of the members of the Capital Budget Committee actually checked out what $10,000 in 1987 is worth today. And it's $26,233.27. So we thought that realistically raising it to $25,000 made a great deal of sense.
Thank you, Corey. Advisor members with comments, questions for Corey? Reactions? So, oh, go ahead, Peter.
And I was intimately involved in this discussion on capital budget, and I was a proponent of staying with the 10,000. And after consideration of the pros and cons, it made sense to move to the higher limit for a number of reasons, which I see the benefit of. And to move back the date stemming from the budget makers, it made sense for the flow of budgeting to get capital up front and then operational budgets through the process. So I was the one that recommended the change to 25,000 and the date. So I think it will benefit the whole process.
Thanks, Peter. I'll just chime in that I also think this makes sense. Both, as Corey said, the shift in the date seems like it will make the process work better. And I think it is reasonable to think that budget makers by December 1 would have a good idea of capital needs for the coming year, given that this is all laid out on a 5-year plan. I do wonder, Corey, whether when Peter Morris did the calculation of what's a $1987 worth today, whether we use the consumer price index or the price index for personal consumption expenditures. But it's going to come out to, as you said, about 25,000, and maybe Peter and I can have a side conversation about that one. But there too, it seemed like just, to me, it seemed like just a sensible updating of bylaw that hadn't been touched or revisited for quite some time. Anybody else?
That's it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you. That's it.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you, Corey. Appreciate your going through that with us. All right. So last one up for tonight. So Article 16, amending the Personnel Administration Plan with the warrant article adding a longevity benefit for town employees. Vicki Rellis, floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Can I share my screen?
Yes, let me just make the screen share I have going away, and you should be able to do that.
You're all going to be guinea pigs for my presentation for town meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to take a look at the warrant. And many of you were present at the COLA meeting where we kind of discussed the different types of opportunities that the town would have to work with, making it monies available to municipal employees, either by merit pay or longevity pay in addition to COLA. And because merit has been kind of put on the side, and Jeremy's going to be taking that up along with everything else that he has on his plate, I kind of took the ball and started the investigation of what would be a longevity pay warrant and what it would look like. So basically, we want to put the warrant together because we want to amend the Personnel Administration Plan, include the longevity payment for benefit eligible municipal employees, and to add appropriate funds. And why longevity pay? It's pretty obvious, but in somebody doesn't understand, it really does give workers and people that work for the town it's a way for us to give them something to tell them that we appreciate what they've done over the years, that they can add to, their human capital is important. It's a retaining way, it's a way to retain employees using longevity pay. And it really keeps them in a way, basically to show them our appreciation. And one of the things, the human capital is a big thing for me, and how a lot of these people have been in their jobs for a long time, and they understand, the knowledge, the nuances, and because of that, they can, make processes smoother. They bring things like we've all just heard from Heidi and Deb and everybody else. They bring that knowledge to you when they're presenting things. So, we just want to make sure that this is a way we can tell them that we appreciate what they've done. So what we did is we took a look at a lot of the towns around us and took an average of what everybody's making for longevity pay, what some of the towns are giving. And we put together a little bit of a chart. I just wanted to show you, I did some research, and basically there were a lot of studies done, but I picked this one out because it's more visible for longevity. And basically the employees for this particular local government in North Carolina said that the highest two responses to the question of the tools to deal with the luxury salaries were seen as most effective tools to keep employees in local government. The highest two responses to this question include pay increases for longevity and salary adjustments based on market pay analysis. So it is a big deal for people that work in municipalities. This is the warrant. And again, it goes through a little bit of an overview of why we're doing it. We want to show the municipal employees that we appreciate what they've done. There's some caveats
to how much they've worked in the town, how many years they've put in, and what they will be getting every year based on the number of years that they've been working for the town, and the eligibility requirements and who administers it. And basically, this can be amended from time to time by in town meeting by personnel board. We work closely with the town administrator and the assistant town administrator to make sure that this all fits correctly. The longevity pay policy is more explicit in how the pay is actually disseminated in terms of eligibility, service time, what the payments would be, who's eligible, who's not eligible. And Deb had put together a chart of the current status of the employees in the town and what their years of service are. Amazing how many people have been here over 5 years. That says a lot. And with this chart, the adjustments would be, so we've noted that we wanted to take out the September and March would be the times that there would be a payout for these. So each total at this juncture for fiscal 24 would be 5175, and then the total would be 10,350. To note that if this is passed, and I hope that it will be, and the payout is under 11,000 this year, should be easy to be absorbed between multiple departments, and for future budgets, there would be a separate line item labeled longevity pay, and the projected amount would be included in that line. So 2 things I need from you just to take a look at this. One, is this clear enough for lay people to understand what we're trying to do? And then I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you, Vicki. Thanks for going through that. So Peter, let's start with you. I think you were first with a hand up.
Yes, Vicki, when we were discussing with you the COLA increase, you had mentioned something about longevity, but it was out there. And now this has materialized.
Right.
And it's best practice to, in every company I've been with, for-profit, nonprofit, has the longevity recognition for multiple purposes, financial and human resource aspects.
Exactly.
So I think this is well worth the investment, and thank you for going through the technical aspects of it to get it on the warrant. And I think it will enhance the services and those in government that perform those services.
Thank you. I had a lot of help putting this together, and everybody was very excited. So thank you for that.
Steve, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Vicki. I have 2 questions. One is, do you know the numbers that you chose for the different levels of service?
Yes.
What did you base those on? Like how or how does that compare to
So-
other municipalities that have?
Yeah, it
longevity?
does compare to other municipalities, but Deb went through, where is it? Yeah, Deb went through some of the union contracts that are in town. And that was the first thing we did, because we wanted to make sure that this wasn't off by too much, what people under these contractual collective bargaining agreements are getting. So we looked at that first, because that was pretty important, that if this was off, if they were getting double what everybody else was, it would create problems. So that was the first thing we looked at. And then we did, a brief overview of towns locally, and this pretty much is in the range. It's not that far-fetched. There's some people, that may get a little bit under the 500, but basically, so we did 2 things to answer your question. We looked at all the collective bargaining agreements in town, anybody else that had contractual agreements that included some longevity pay. We made sure that we were in line with those, and then we looked at other towns and we came up with these numbers.
Great. And then my other question is, these numbers that are listed are basically locked in unless changed by a future town meeting, is that right? Or
Correct.
would, so annual COLA increases would not touch these numbers?
It would.
Wait,
We
COLA
had a
would?
meeting, COLA would be reflection in here because we had a meeting with the select board and they suggested that they wanted to be able to do that, that COLA would be influence these numbers when COLA was assigned to pay. And there is something in here that says that COLA, it will do that only if financial situation allows. Let me see if I can find it.
It says, I think the wording is, the above listed amounts of awards shall be adjusted by a cost of living increase percentage each fiscal year after FY 24, subject to appropriation, is what
Right.
the current words say.
So when the town council has looked at this a few times and they felt that covered the possibility of not applying COLA if money was not available in the budget to be able to support it. Does that answer your question?
Wait, so then who would make that decision? If whether or not money
When
was available?
we put the budgets together, this is going to be in everybody's budget. So if it's a stretch, if you compare X number with an X plus COLA and put those numbers together and it doesn't become in line with what the budget expectation is, then somebody would have to take care of that. So probably be, from what I've seen, how these are managed, it's really managed by the town administrator. And when the budgets are put together, and so everybody that has someone that would be getting this longevity pay in their department, when they present their budget to Jeremy, then they would talk about this and see, and if overall it looks like it couldn't be supported, then overall this would remain the same and not have a COLA increase.
But it would be overall, it would be townwide, either everybody gets the COLA increase on their longevity or nobody does, right?
Right.
It wouldn't,
It wouldn't be, no, you can't do that. Then it becomes a nightmare. I mean, you can't go and say, finance department gets it and, other people don't. It's this is across the board for all the town employees.
So
But
then there'll
budgetarily,
be,
it's the response. Sorry.
so there's
ahead.
going to be a new line item in whose budget then? Select board or accounting?
It would probably absorb separate line item labeled longevity pay for future budgets that would include this. So everybody's budget would have that in it.
Oh, everybody's, I see. So it wouldn't be like, okay, the accounting department is just handing out longevity townwide and the total was this amount and it was a single budget line item. It's each individual department would have a new longevity line and.
Correct.
Okay, I see. Okay.
I mean, if you want it to be clearer, let me know. And there's still time to move things around a little bit.
Yes, Stephen, I'd like DPW and police, they have a longevity line, right now because of their
Yes.
union contracts. We would just
Because
do
of
the
the
same for
union.
all the other departments.
Yep.
Right.
Okay, Steve, is that it for you?
Yes, thank you.
Jane, okay, thanks, Steve. Jane, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Vicki, with respect to the COLA applying to the longevity pay, is that something that is typical among the other, you mentioned the other places you looked to see, what was sort of typical longevity pay. Was it also typical that COLA applied to the longevity?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just curious, has council reviewed all the language of
Yes.
this or drafted? Okay.
Yeah, several times.
Okay.
But again, if you take another look at this and you have any questions, just let me know. I mean, we went through this part pretty succinctly with them, as well as this policy, which will be, this will be put in, and the personnel plan will be changed accordingly with this referenced in there. So they went through all of we put this together, and then town council really looked at it in terms of eligibility, make sure that, we're covering everybody correctly. And this is pretty generic with everybody else's, in every town that I looked at within Massachusetts and outside of Massachusetts, of who they pay, how long they have to be in service for. If people have to be called out for military service, that's counted, they come back in. So there's a lot of nuances to this that we looked at to make sure everybody was covered.
Jeff, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Well, I think Wasim might have had his hand up first.
Oh, you are higher on my screen. Go ahead, Jeff. We'll come to Wasim in a second. Go ahead.
I
You're
would say,
fine.
I think we should apply COLA every year and not have it be variable. And the reason why is we just saw with capital budget, we were only allowing $10,000, and that was a 1988 number, whatever. It's a way of indexing these dollar amounts. We benchmark these dollar amounts, or Vicky and the team did, and I think it just indexes it so that the incentive doesn't degrade over time due to
Yeah, because 500, you're right, Jeff, 500 today, and in 5 years, it's, I don't even think about that.
I don't know if we need to change the language, but I think we should always just apply the COLA to it also. I think it just makes it more consistent that way. So I think that's an important thing there, and I think it really does help retain long-term employees too. Because you can often have people that we've seen this with some of our salaries. We brought it up in advisory a few weeks ago. People have been here 15 or 20 years, and they've been just only getting COLA, and they really don't change their job position and don't have an opportunity. It's a small town, so there's only one lead person in each department, so you can't get a promotion necessarily. So it's a way to provide incentives for staying with the town. And I was just going to add a quick comment. You did a great job presenting, Vicky, but when you present it, the public hearing, which I'm assuming you will, put PowerPoint in presentation mode and it'll blow up on the screen. So people will see the full slide, but you did a great job.
Okay. Thank you.
Wasim, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. When I'm mentioning this, I was trying to squint and try to see on the screen.
Sorry.
No,
I'm actually using Keynote, and I don't usually use it because my PowerPoint wouldn't fire up today, so I apologize.
Oh, well, you have a backup. Okay, very good. So quick question. These are the awards are yearly, right? So let's say years of service from 5 to 9. Every year it's going to be $500. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the practice as opposed to have a large lump sum at 5, 10, 15? So is this usually the practice for longevity
so
pay?
every year between like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, every year they get 500. And then 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, they get 600. So it adds up. So that's what, 6 years, they get 650. So that ends up being $3,600, $3,700 total for that time period.
Right. Okay. No, I was just wondering because I've seen also cases where you get 5 once you get to 5 years and you get a larger lump sum. You get to 10 years and you get a much larger lump sum than, the yearly ones. So I was wondering.
Yeah. It might add, it might end up adding up over the years. That's what it adds up to.
And
I don't know what the teachers get. I don't know how they do the teachers and the DPWs. I don't know how they, but I'm thinking it might be similar in terms of I know it's yearly, but I don't know if anybody gives a lump sum. The thing is, the teachers have steps. There's really nothing else besides this for the people that work in town hall. And the merit pay is going to be a while before that starts becoming real. And at least this will help in the meantime.
Okay, and the other question I have for I guess, advisory and so on is everyone seems to be of the opinion to include these in the individual budgets, but isn't that a lot more work than just, like, from our perspective, as a department that have employees that have been there longer, is that a department that's spending more? And in my opinion, no. So, I mean, why not just not have it simple and be in one single budget instead of distributed and so much more work in all the individual departmental budgets? It just sounds to me like more work.
Deb, are you still on?
I am. So
what do you think?
it's really 6, 1 half a dozen, because what ends up happening is, like, when the employee's paid out, we actually code it to an account number, so we can make that account number whatever we want it to be. So if it goes to the department, or if it just goes all into, the select board's budget, or goes into our budget, it's not more work. We opted to put it in the departments just because that's what police does and DPW does. The teachers do that. We just thought that was, following some uniformity.
We could change it if it made it easier.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like one of these things, once this gets going, I think it'll become pretty apparent whether having it separated out by department is causing confusion or that's working fine. And as Deb said, it seems like if collectively we decide that there's a way to do it to be better, there's nothing about the bylaw here that would prevent us from just making whatever accounting adjustments we wanted to make.
Yeah, that's easy enough to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't affect it here. We wouldn't have to go to town meeting for that.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to jump in with just a couple questions and comments. Vicki, thank you for going through this and for all the work you did in putting this together. So one question for towns that have gotten to doing merit pay, how does that typically interact with this type of a longevity program? What do towns that have both do? How do they interact? What's any sense of what the usual arrangement is there?
From what I've seen, they don't interact at all because merit is based on performance, and it doesn't really have any implication on time. So they're usually, from what I've seen, kept as a separate entity.
And presumably a number of towns do both.
Yes.
And they just separate programs that run independently. Okay. And then I'll just point you to the comment in the chat that Jeannie Guthrie made just about noting that in DPW longevity pay comes in payroll right before Thanksgiving. So just if you didn't have the chat open, I'll just mention that.
Okay, yeah, we're going to do it twice a year. September and March is what we looked at. Budget wise would be best.
Okay.
And again, that can be changed too if it doesn't work out. I think that, you just have to really watch this the first year to make sure, that if there are things that we need to tweak, that we can do that to make it run smoother for everybody.
Okay. And then finally, just since you asked for, feedback on the presentation. So one thing, because I am a Keynote user, it's the play button up above that would throw it into full screen mode.
Oh, you know what? I was going to do that. There you go.
Yeah. So
don't use it enough. I was trying it and I said, I got to do that, but I forgot to do it. Sorry.
So, you can always come to advisory for, Apple Mac advice.
I definitely needed that. Sorry about that, guys.
And the only other reaction just to the slides, it's all the right information. Some of the slides have a lot on them. And so just, for public hearing, just think about how much stuff you want to have packed in and how much people are going to be able to absorb, you know, in the amount of time you're going to have to go through things. So just, you know, one reaction just to the slides.
And
Okay,
doubly
I'll
so actually
kind of
for
cut down.
doubly so for the town meeting, assuming, are you planning on giving a presentation at the actual town meeting as well?
In front of everybody in town meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to.
Yeah, so I think even more so, because for the public hearing, we're going to be on Zoom and everybody's going to be in front of their own computer screen. But at the town meeting, everyone's going to have to look at it, project it up, you know, on a big screen. And,
Okay.
you know, sometimes it's hard to read anyways on a big screen, and even more so with if there's a lot of dense information on it.
And if people are reading a lot of it, they won't be listening to you as much. So you got to get that.
Yeah,
balance.
no, that's true. All right, I'll do bullets. I'll take out stuff and do bullets. I may send a few of you some preview to let me know whether I did it correctly.
Happy to look at anything if it'd be helpful.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else with anything for Vicky? Okay, thanks,
Thanks
Vicky.
for your support. You've been terrific.
Okay, so that gets us to the end of tonight's list of warrant articles. So thanks everybody for, I didn't get a bunch of people have dropped off, but thanks everybody who presented and walked us through things. That's super helpful for us to get the preview before we get to the public hearing. Our last bit of business is to our favorite to approve minutes from the prior meeting. So give me just a second here to, I know it's late, but if we don't do this, it will only get more painful at later meetings when we'll have a backlog to do. So give me just a second here to get these up. Thanks to Natalie for putting these together. I'll do the usual thing and just scroll through.
Yeah, and capital budget went to 11 last night, so this is early.
Oh, well, you know, we run a tight ship here, you know. Gotta keep the trains running on time. So any corrections, anything typos, anything we need to adjust? And as you'll see, apologies for only sending these out a few hours ago. I got bogged down, and Natalie was very quick about doing these. And then I always like to look at these before they get sent out. And I got bogged down in getting that done.
Did you take your pill?
I'm sorry, say that again. Oh, that was not for me. Okay. And by design, relatively terse discussions, relatively terse write-ups of the back and forth conversations that we had. Any corrections? Okay, if not, I would happily entertain a motion to approve minutes as on screen.
So moved.
Second.
All right, and quick roll call. Steve.
Aye.
Jane.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Wasim.
Abstain.
Okay. Peter.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
And I am aye as well. So I think that gets us to 7-0 for approving minutes. Next meeting, March 8th, we'll go through the rest of the warrant articles. You know, I'm starting to get that feeling we're getting close to the end, and I'm going to miss doing this every Wednesday night. I don't know what I'm going to do once we get, you know, past the public hearing and we aren't getting together every Wednesday night like this. So March 8th, 7 o'clock, usual time, agenda's posted. And we'll get to that next week. So unless anybody has anything else to get in before we quit, I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So
I
moved.
move to adjourn.
Second.
Great. And we'll do a quick roll call again. I'll just start at the top of my screen again. Steve,
Aye.
Jane,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Wasim,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
and Nora.
Aye.
And I'm I as well, so that's 8:00 to adjourn. We are done. Thank you very much, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you, Dan.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good,
Thanks.
good night. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.